Greetings and welcome to another lecture in comparative psychology. Now we're going to be finishing off the topic of aggression today by talking about different types of effects that could basically serve as variables in determining whether or not an individual aggresses and in what way. The first is called the bystander effect. And the bystander effect, I love that these things are named exactly what they are. I mean, you can't get much better than that. It's also known as the eavesdropper effect, which also describes pretty much what it is. As you could probably tell from the name, essentially, it turns out that animals don't have to actually participate in a fight in order to use the information from it. We talked before about the different models about how, individuals may be threatening one another, or they may, be starting with little fights and working their way up and that sort of thing. Well, it turns out that other individuals that are watching the fight may indeed be able to get information themselves, that they don't have to actually be in the fight in order to gain useful information. It appears that if one animal watches another animal get its butt kicked, that the observer may learn that it probably should not aggress against the butt kicker, or perhaps that it should aggress against the butt kickee. Yeah, I mean, and it's not only whether they won or lost. It's much more sophisticated than that. It's also how they fought. So even if an individual lost, if that individual lost nobly, if it fought the good fight, if it, escalated when it probably shouldn't have, then other animals will see that and they will use that information and say, that might be a loser, but I don't know that I want to fight it because it did A, B, and C, and therefore I might not be as lucky and it might actually be able to kick my butt. What also tends to happen, if you remember back from an earlier lecture when I was talking about how individuals that are fighting, particularly individuals that win a fight, oftentimes see a rise in androgens, in those male hormones that make an individual more likely to fight. So it appears that at least in some cases, watching a fight might cause a similar rise in androgens. That it isn't the actual fighting, but simply watching someone else fight might cause that increase, might then cause that individual to be more likely to pick a fight themselves or to fight back when aggressed against. So it does look like in humans, I suspect you can all come up with examples of this in humans, but it looks like non-human animals also can use information or can get riled up by watching a fight as almost as much as they might by actually participating in one. Now, the next effect sounds similar. It's called the audience effect. And this isn't about members of the audience watching, so it's not the same as the bystander effect. This is actually an effect caused by whether or not the individuals fighting have an audience, are being watched. And then, in fact, if an individual that is fighting knows it's being watched, it may actually change its behavior. An aggressive animal might become more aggressive, thinking, okay, I'll not only win this fight, but I'll win the next ones too, because I'll let them know that I am not one to be trifled with. Or in some cases, an individual that's losing may change its behavior in the hope that someone else might come in and break up the fight. This actually is something that is seen quite a bit among primates, specifically among chimpanzees. If in chimpanzees, higher ranking members very often serve kind of as police sounds like a strong word, but they sort of serve, maybe it's more along the lines of playground monitors. Where people watching kids on a playground, they decide, is this a play fight? Is this a real fight? If it gets too rough, we're going to break it up. And so apparently in chimps, if a chimp is losing and it knows that a higher ranking member of the troop is watching, particularly if it's a higher ranking member of the troop, not only higher ranking than himself, but perhaps higher ranking than the one that's kicking their butt, particularly if they have a relationship with that higher ranking member. A lot of lower ranking members, for instance, will do things like groom higher ranking members to make friends with them. This should really be sounding familiar to you if you ever were a kid on the playground, because I know it's sounding familiar to me. And so what might happen is a chimp that's getting its butt kicked, who has a possible high-ranking ally in the audience, may wind up screaming louder, in the hopes that that higher-ranking ally will come and break the fight up. And in fact, that does happen. In that higher-ranking allies do occasionally come and they'll break the fight up, or they'll try to slow it down, or they might themselves overwhelm the one who's doing the attacking and basically say, okay, we're going to break this up. So that, yes, being watched not only changes the watchers, but it changes the watchees. There's also some suggestions, and this is a little audience effect, and this is a little stand on its own, that individual social networks, and yes, non-human animals have social networks. Now, of course, they don't have the online social networks, but think if you do. If you are on a social networking site like Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever is up for when you're watching this. Think about how you have all of those people, and that how different people play different roles in the group. Some are the peacekeepers, some come up with ideas, some are followers, some are leaders, some are fighters, some are not. And think about how all these individuals work together. And it turns out that in highly social animals that live in large enough groups to have that sort of, different tasks for different individuals, then they also can play a role in how much aggression there is. Your book talks about a case where in a type of baboon, there are apparently a subgroup that serve sort of as what they call the police, that go around and make sure that everyone's behaving nicely and no one's beating up on anyone that doesn't deserve it and such like. Baboons are very hierarchical, and they are very aggressive. And when those police members are removed from the group, not only is there more aggression, which is to be understood, the monitor is not there anymore, but there's also less friendly behavior. It's almost like baboons are less likely to interact with those they don't know, or those that they might not get along with 100%, because there's no longer somebody around that will break up the fight. So these sorts of things get very sophisticated. We tend to think of animals as being very simple, that, they fight, and if they lose, then that matters. But it actually is with what they observe, with what the interactions of those around them can make a very big difference in how much animals themselves aggress and are aggressed upon.